Shiv Nada University and Chidatai Ventures for their support. And post this fireside chat, we're going to have some pitches, so please do stay back for the pitches, and then we also have another panel conversation lined up after the pitches. So I hope all of you stay here for that as well, and over to you, Shereen.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back here for TiE, and thanks Aditya for this conversation on an issue which I believe deserves a lot more attention. I wish we had more people here listening to us, but I guess that's why the issue of accessibility, and we were just talking before we came out here, that it really is talking about an invisible minority, and the sad reality is that we don't even have an accurate number of what or who qualifies as disabled in this country today. And I think that's really where we should start, Aditya, because the hope here in this room is to get business and corporations and companies and startups and entrepreneurs to look at those with disability, you can call them what you like, as an opportunity that they can create solutions for. But how do you create demand? How do you create solutions when you have no idea of market size? You sent me data, and this is as per the 2011 census, which again is a guesstimate at this point in time, that 2% of the population qualifies or categorizes themselves as disabled. Now, in an environment like this where you don't know what kind of disability somebody has or how large that potentially could be, how do you go about designing a business plan in an environment like this?
Thanks, Shereen. Whenever I've spoken to you, I have to always be very attentive to your questions, because there'll be like 50 questions in one shot, but all great points. And I think it starts off with what you said, that it's invisible, right? And somewhat it's a tragedy that we look through, and we're not quite sure that, and even if we spot disability around us, most of the time individuals or corporates do not really know how to deal with it. The second aspect is that the numbers are much larger than what a statistic tells us, because even this 2% from the 2011 census are people who are identifying themselves or are declaring themselves as being disabled. In a country like India, where we have such a deep and long tail of economic opportunities, there are probably many, many more. Now let's take a very conservative view and say it's 2%. That's 30 million people. That is the size of Australia. So the very first question that I often ask myself, and I encourage the audience to ask for themselves, is, would you be happy to start a business with a captive audience the size of Australia? A lot of large companies will give their left arm to say that, wow. The second is that we now need to sort of diversify, pun unintended, in the definition of disability too. There is physical disabilities, there are cognitive disabilities, and when you do that, then it becomes an even larger market. So, at a conservative level, if we're looking at a market size of anywhere between 50 to 100 million people, as entrepreneurs, as tech entrepreneurs, all that one has to do is keep their eyes and ears open, and you'll see at least so many different opportunities and hard problems to solve. And as I often say, the best application of technology is when technology is being used to solve a hard problem to solve. Whether that be in physical infrastructure, whether that be in accessibility of websites and applications and so on and so forth, whether that be in creating solutions that make this part of the population more inclusive, where they can access economic opportunities, whether in the case of education, whether in high school or university education or education and learning initiatives while somebody is within a company, right? Or for that matter, when you are looking at this entire population, and Geeta sitting in this room, Geeta Dang has been, I mean, she's drilled this into my head, and it's such an exciting opportunity. She always asks me, Aditya, why don't we look at them as customers? The moment I see them as revenue-paying customers, business people have a very strange ability to find solutions which get them money. So, but I think it goes back to the one important point, and I think you raised it when we were having coffee together, that there's an absence of data, there's an asymmetry of data to be able to understand how large is the problem set or the challenge set or the opportunity set that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that's not just a problem when we talk about navigating the world of accessibility. Lack of data is a problem in general, and I think we need to do a lot better on that. But to your point about the fact that we're missing the opportunity because we don't see it necessarily, and I want to share a story here with the audience that's watching. Somebody reached out to me saying, a gentleman called Alok Kejriwal, and he's actually doing the news for people who have a hearing disability and who cannot hear. And so he said, how do you believe that people like me access the news or access entertainment or watch a movie? And the answer is we don't, because no one's catering to that market. No one is designing solutions for us. And that is when it struck me. I realized that this was something that we had not thought of. And I'm somebody who believes in diversity. I'm somebody who believes in inclusion. But I had not thought about this aspect, that my shows, my news, the content that we were putting out was inaccessible to perhaps a large majority of individuals. So I'm so glad that we have somebody signing here, and it's also made me think about how we can actually curate and design content to make it much more accessible. But let's address the issue of solutions now, Aditya, and let's talk about the aspect of employment to start with, because that then links back to your point about treat them as customers, and once you see that customer opportunity or approach, you can build solutions for that customer. In your experience, there is an awareness or a greater awareness today within corporate India. Many corporations are onboarding people with disabilities, physical and mental disabilities as well. But how much distance has been covered, and what are some of the challenges in being able to take this forward?
I think like most things, there are pockets of excellence, definitely. There are, let's say in the travel, tourism, hospitality space that I'm reasonably familiar with, there are a few hotel companies that have gone, ahead and employed a lot of people with different abilities. In my previous airline, we started off, I think, by hiring differently abled people maybe about 10 odd years ago. We're doing similar things in AkasaAir today. But the very first step, and I'll be honest, was a whole process of self-education and sensitization where the organization becomes ready to start dealing with it. And that goes all the way from physical infrastructure to, let's say, if you have someone, a colleague of yours, who is visually challenged or who is hearing impaired, then how do you if you're in a meeting, right, and you're showing a PowerPoint slide, are you talking to every slide for the person who's visually impaired? And are you kind of making sure that you have things written down and notes set out and stuff like that for somebody who's hearing impaired? And it starts off with that. But by the way, I'll also share, Shereen, that out of my personal experience, it's not terribly hard. And I'll give you a few examples, right? I had several colleagues who used to use the wheelchair at the airports. I had a previous direct report who was my head of network planning, who was legally blind, helping me run the third largest low-cost carrier in the world, right? We have neurodiverse colleagues in AkasaAir today. Or but it's a constant, like you said, you know, it's each time you go through an experience, it opens your eyes. You know, I teach at Ashoka University, where I sit on the board. I'm one of the founders. But you know, in my last semester, I had 2 students who were visually impaired, right, completely. And I have 1 student this time who's partially. And so even while teaching in class, one has to constantly keep that in mind. And like you said, you have to think, how do I make my content more accessible? But it starts off with little things like, does your website say that this hotel or this airline or this, you know, facility is accessible? Is your website itself accessible? Is your app accessible? And I'm talking about those subjects because, you know, this is a hall full of budding and tech entrepreneurs. And for doing that, there is again a lot of opportunities to make that happen, I think.
Yeah, you know, since we are talking about minorities, invisible minorities in many ways, I want to use the analogy, for instance, of what we've seen happen as far as the issue of gender parity is concerned, or lack of. And it's taken, thank you, it's taken regulation, it's taken mandates from the market regulator to ensure that we see better representation of women in boardrooms. Do you believe that that is also the answer? Regulation can drive a much more inclusive workforce? Do you believe that mandates is necessarily the way forward, or do you believe that that may not work very well? Because as you said, organizations need to be better prepared, organizations need to be sensitized and so on and so forth. Do you believe it should happen organically, or do you believe that, like we've seen in the case of enhancing women's representation on boards, etc., regulation is the way forward?
Yeah, I'll give an answer which is kind of in your camp, but not. It's not a very popular answer with some of my business colleagues. I think regulation is important to nudge people down a certain direction. There is no denying the fact that in certain things there is a need for a certain amount of affirmative action. The only big caveat that I'll say is, often we use regulation and it's like a switch. You know, we just pull a lever, and that creates a lot of resistance, and there's a lot of heartburn with it. Or people will do things which are like either greenwashing or gender washing, right? So if, on the other hand, these regulations truly nudge us in that direction and take this as a journey, which over a period of time, a reasonable period of time, we go this way, start off with some low-hanging fruit, I'd say that, you know, that is required. I mean, we are seeing this in climate. We're seeing this in gender parity. We're seeing this in pay parity. So why should that not be in this area as well?
You know, we're here talking to a room full of entrepreneurs who are perhaps looking at this as an opportunity that they can design solutions for. You know, some of the low-hanging fruit in your experience at this point in time, that can be addressed using tech solutions, devices, wearables, hearables, so on and so forth. Where do you believe the gaps currently exist and are big enough for a room full of entrepreneurs like this to go after?
I would say that if I were sitting in one of their shoes, I would see the differently abled first as a massive pool of talent. I don't think anybody over here can say today they have no talent issue. Talent shortage is like the biggest thing holding us back, right, from realizing what our true potential is. If we are growing at 30%, we could probably grow at 100% if we had access to talent. So I think, but that starts off with I always say, you know, when you as CEOs or founders or leaders are talking to your HR teams and drawing up a job description, make sure that you are drawing up a job description that allows for diversity. That's item number 1. The second is to see, and this is like a money-making idea, see what are all the friction points that are impacting these 50 to 100 million people in our country, and see that how technology can take those friction points away, because there sits a unicorn idea and many unicorn ideas. And the cool thing is, once we go past that proof of concept, to replicate this in another market becomes very, very easy. You know, let's say if you came up with a technology solution to make, I don't know, airline ticket booking more accessible. You can apply to every airline in the world. It's not specific to India, and so I think that's where I'd say, you know, thinking like that will mean it's good for business, it's good for talent, it's good for bringing your costs down, it's good for increasing revenues.
You know, since we're talking about access and accessibility, do you think that there is at this point in time an awareness within the investor community as well? Because at the end of the day, you know, there are young entrepreneurs here who may want to or may have good ideas that they want to take forward, and I think we will hear from a few of them in a short while from now. But do you think that there is appetite, risk appetite in the investor community to back some of this?
Absolutely. Certainly in certain pockets of the investor community, there are so many very large funds now which are absolutely exclusively ESG focused, or even larger funds with very strong ESG charters. But needless to say, it cannot be something that is superficial, because then investors are smart enough, they see through the wrapping paper. You know, one has to be able to integrate this into the way of working, into the business model and the culture of the organization. There is always room at the top, and if you have an authentic story like that and a consistent and authentic story like that, I think you'll find it easier and more patient long-term capital coming into your companies than in a typical sort of 4-year, 5-year private equity cycle.
You know, you've of course, and we'll talk a little bit about Aditya's own efforts in trying to make the world a little bit more accessible. But Aditya, when was the last time that we heard of a company in India or a startup in India trying to address of accessibility? I mean, there is clearly a gap, and again, one is of course not being able to see the opportunity, spot the opportunity, but the other is also perhaps there isn't an ecosystem that is built around it, and we do know that, you know, the network effect, the ecosystem effect is required, is necessary, and is helpful. So, you know, how do you sort of build that out, even if someone were to develop a solution at this point in time?
I think you know, I'm an ever optimist, and what I see is that as business leaders make this very front and center, and you and I both work a lot on the gender parity side, we have seen this change. Remember, you and I are having this conversation at the World Economic Forum some years back. And you can see now that's kind of come into the center, and there are a whole bunch of other initiatives. So my hope is that people will actually see this as a very, very quick opportunity, you know. So first, you just cannot speak enough about it, and it has to be front and center. The second is that, you know, the investor community coming in and saying, you know what, if someone comes up with a unique solution, there is great returns possible, so do that. And then that doesn't take away from the affirmative action part of it, which is, it has to be, you know, part of our mandates, it has to be part of the policy framework. And yeah, I mean, look, we started off with a certain size of the hall, but now we have standing room only. So we must be doing something right.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see that we've onboarded some people onto this cause. But you know, what's the role that you believe the government can play, both at the central level as well as state levels? Because you know, whether we talk about areas like education, which you brought up, and this is going to have to be an integral part as far as curriculum, etc., is concerned as well. What's the role that you believe the government, both at the central level as well as the state level, you know, authorities, municipal authorities, civic authorities can play in ensuring that it is a much more accessible world that we live in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts off with right from the very young years and childhood, where, you know, somehow still social justice is something that is, it's like something on the side. you know, it's like
somebody else's problem.
It's somebody else's problem. It's one department's problem. I call it in the corporate world, I coined a term called the 2% conundrum. The 2% conundrum is that if 2% of your revenues or profits have to go to CSR, it also means 2% of your mind space is going there, right? As opposed to thinking this is good for me. So it starts off with healthcare, nutrition, and education at a very basic level. The second is for the government to allow for a lot more flexibility, to allow for different kinds of, to make education more accessible. You'll have to create certain allowances in admission. You'll have to create certain allowances in the way, like, education is imparted. Then the third is that what are the incentives? I always say, don't give a tax break to everybody, but can you incentivize people who are trying to build businesses which are furthering the cause? Then people, it's like I come first in class. If you come first in class, here is a reward for you, and that will make sure that companies start eyeing that PLI scheme. Let's call it that. So maybe there is a accessibility linked scheme, that you make your business, you make your products, you make your company more accessible, and therefore you have an incentive. I think those are the 3-4 areas where I think government can play a huge role, which is all across, and it is not left to the responsibility of one department of Ministry of Social Justice.
Oh, absolutely. It has to be everybody's problem for it to be able to become somebody's problem. And you're absolutely right. I think thinking of incentives, thinking of ways to be able to reward companies and corporations or entrepreneurs by way of benefits if they are addressing a population that otherwise is going unserved and deserves to be served. I think that is something
and to bring in the private part, you can incentivize investors that if you invest in this kind of a business, there is XYZ incentive. So it then sort of begins a flywheel that and then you can gradually withdraw.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be in perpetuity. It can be a 5-year, 10-year window that is opened up, and we do need windows and doors to be opened up. Before I end, Aditya, I want to ask you, why are you so passionate about this, and what are you going to be prioritizing in this space as you move forward?
Shereen, I somehow I truly believe that I truly believe that the world needs to be a more equitable place. And I also somehow feel that from the time I grew up to now, the world has become somewhat more intolerant, and people are running in 5 different directions. So the only thing that education brings to us is not follow the crowd and say, let's do what is right. So it really starts off with that, and I think there is nothing wrong in truly acting upon a conviction of trying to make the world a better place. My frankly focus is, I'd like to do 100 different things. My focus right now is on energy transition, on gender parity, and increasing employability in sort of parts of the country where economic opportunities are less than others. So I mean, that's
Those are big
challenges.
Big challenges.
They'll keep me busy.
It will keep you busy. Plenty on your plate. Aditya Ghosh, many thanks for joining us
so
to take
much.
us through why we need to look at the issue of accessibility and give it much more attention. And I'm glad to see that we do have more people listening. We do have more people listening to us today, and they will take back this message. And hopefully we'll have more people creatively thinking about solutions to design as well. Thanks very much, and great speaking with you. And I think we are going to be listening or hearing from entrepreneurs who are going to be creating for this space.
Yeah, so before we do that, big round of applause for Shereen and Aditya. I think we're sparking what's obviously a very, very important conversation, and I hope that all of you can then further spread it out to folks in your network to have this conversation, not just about what we need to do, but also the opportunity that exists in addressing this market as entrepreneurs. Before we move to the pitches, is one quick thing, which is a quick token of appreciation from TiE